Yeah. Yo, welcome back to another edition of the Men Who Cry podcast. Like, subscribe, review, tell a friend, and tell a friend, and tell a friend, and tell a friend. If you're not doing these things, I have to assume that you've been stepping in dog poop all around the Northeast. Pick up your dog crap. On today's episode, we will be talking about the madness that is coming, that is March Madness, and the one guy who has been leading all the madness in far as the will he or won't he play, a team that might be leaving, and my stance on what teams mean to individual cities. But first, we have to talk about what took place on Sunday. When you guys listen to this will be Tuesday, but we'll be talking about the USA men's team who pulled off one of the biggest upsets we've seen in a while, and winning the gold medal. First time in 46 years since Lake Placid. If anyone's seen Miracle on Ice, this is the second time that we've been able to do this. So it was a great win by the team. Obviously, as y'all can probably tell, not the biggest hockey guy in the world. I can understand hockey to a degree, but it's one of those things where it's just, there's too many things going on. It's hard for me to get into it. But the one thing that I will say is that I love stakes. And nothing better than stakes that you have is when you're going for a gold medal and you're the underdog. And watching that game, the one thing that I came away from it was feeling like this. Sports are cool. Like, it's pretty simple. It's not that complicated. They're just cool. And that game was one of the best things I've watched. Helen Beck, who was our goalkeeper, was awesome. And there's a quote coming from the Canadian side that has been circulating around saying that you can, quote unquote, see who the better team was. I kind of get the guy's point. Like, one thing that I think is so interesting about low scoring sports when it comes to like baseball, hockey, things like that, it's kind of hard sometimes to tell who's winning the game. One of the things that you can see about hockey, soccer is also in this kind of grouping as well, is that you can be losing a hockey game, but be winning, if that makes any type of sense. Like, you can be losing the game. It'd be 1-0. You either get up like a soft goal, whether it's in hockey or in soccer. You can maybe give off a leadoff home run. But in baseball, you just have men on base the whole time, but you can't seem to get someone to go over. Or you have so many shots on goal when it comes to soccer and hockey, but you just can't put the puck in, or the ball in rather. And you're just dominating. And for me, it felt like Canada was dominating that game the moment, really the moment after the USA had the double penalties and they were down 5-3 to men on the ice. And it just felt like they were just trying to hang on till the very end, right? Like, I definitely know in soccer, there's a term, especially when the USA didn't have a lot of strikers, they would say, quote unquote, parking the bus. It felt like they were doing that a lot in hockey, where you just weren't opening up the ice. But the fact that they were able to go in and Jack Hughes essentially got the golden gold and defeated the team that I don't think a lot of people thought that they had a chance to beat was awesome. And the also thing that's also great about this is the fact that these motherfuckers really hate each other. Like, it's that real hate. I got into this because we talked about this before in the Four Nations, where USA was taking on Canada. And that got real spicy. And it kind of went in the same kind of way where where Canada was able to pull off the win in that case. And it's just a beautiful thing where you don't necessarily need to know a lot about sports to know when stakes are on the line and what's going to happen in these moments. One of my favorite moments to quickly talk about basketball, which I love doing, is the USA versus France in the Golden Cup game 2 years ago now. Is going to be one of the greatest games I'll ever remember. Even the game against Serbia, just to get to the finals. Because one of my favorite players of all time, Steph Curry, had his moment. This guy has been to the finals. This man has been an MVP. This man has won 73 games in the season. And that picture of him shooting over Victor Wembanyama is just seared into my mind. Because it's a great illustration, I think, whenever Wemby's towards the end of his career, that you can have this almost like generational kind of meeting of the minds, right? These two great players kind of met in this still moment, and it transcends generations. That picture, honestly, for me, is my like Muhammad Ali, him standing in the ring, right? Like that's my thing, where I could just look back and I know exactly where I was in that moment where this guy went through it. And the sad part is, because we're going to talk about the whole thing, is I do think Mike Tirico's comments about what happened very much encapsulated the whole Winter Olympics, right? The whole thing. I'm not a great big Winter Olympics fan. I definitely think that it's just, whether it's just because the sports are kind of sports I've never played before, or they're just not necessarily something that I think that you see all the time. I do think that is great theater, and it's just great things to be able to watch. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to talk about what happened later on. So for those who didn't see it, it's probably been passed around. There's two videos of FBI director who is just going ham inside of the locker room with the USA men's team. And then there was a call from the president of the United States talking about congratulating the guys on the win. One of the guys ends up yelling "daddy," which is a very strange thing to keep doing, but neither here nor there. And they're going on, and the big thing that people are kind of citing is the fact that, Trump made a misogynistic comment basically about the women's team, who also won gold kind of in a similar way as the men's team.
What would really be cool, and we'll do the White House the next day, we'll just have some fun. We have medals for you guys. And we have to, I must tell you, we're going to have to bring the women's team. You do know that. I do believe I probably would be impeached, okay? But anyway, if you could work that out.
It appears that he didn't make a call, or there hasn't been any type of communication. So to the point where he said, I have to invite them to the White House, and they have understandably been like, F off, we're not going to go. Here's kind of like my two kind of points of this, right? And this kind of goes at, I would say, my side of the aisle, per se, liberals per se. I think sometimes people allow the quiet people, or the people who are the smallest voices, to be the loudest, right? If you look throughout the Olympics, several different athletes either came out and said, we do not stand with this administration, or went as far as criticizing this administration, right? With people in the administration firing back at them, right? And there isn't enough times where those voices get risen to the top and allowed to be spoken so loudly, right? And oftentimes it ends up just being this side is criticizing people for supporting the president of the United States. People got to understand, the man won, okay? He has supporters. He still has supporters right now. And in that time space, he's going to do things that are going to piss you off. And that's not okay. But it's also like, it's the banana in the tailpipe. You know what's going to happen. So I would simply say, instead of always jumping into the things that he does, things that piss you off, it needs to be a lot more celebration of the people who do support you and do support the things that you do, right? I mean, there will always be people who will not want to capitulate to the side of authoritarianism. And those are kind of the ways that you have to embody it and see that, right? There were so many of the figure skaters that were coming out against Trump doing incredible work. And while I would say those sports aren't as maybe dynamic, you want to say, as maybe thrilling as what we saw with the men's USA team, those sports still matter. And those women and those men and the people who did speak out, they matter as well. And I come to a lot of this stuff with the idea of what's happening in the next couple of years, and especially this year. This year, we are going to have the this year we're going to have the World Cup, right? It's going to be a different parts of North America and a lot of different parts of, the United States of America, right? In 2 years, the Olympics will be here. The Summer Olympics will be here, hosted mostly in Los Angeles, right? And I had this conversation with one of my coworkers was saying, there is a significantly good chance that this will be my technically second Olympics, but the only chance I will ever be able to go and see Olympic Games and World Cup games. I've been blessed enough to be at an age where I'm able to go ahead and do this on my own and financially stable enough to say, yeah, I can go to those games. And it's going to also suck for me to see a guy who I objectively do not like, can't stand, don't rock with, insert himself in his ability to sports wash his political career by inserting himself in these moments. And I know a lot of people, I'm just seeing stuff people are saying online of saying that they were objectively rooting for Canada, right? For what happened, yesterday. And to that I say, while I understand where you are coming from, ultimately, I believe that this country is always bigger than who is sitting in the presidency, right? He is not going to be president forever. I know a lot of people are afraid of that. It's not true, okay? There'll be someone else in that seat. And as someone who has just witnessed a lot of death in in my life personally in the last couple of years, I do not believe in this idea of simming forward through the rough parts of your life, right? Life gets tough, right? And it's not going to always be, sunshine and rainbows. There's always going to be something that's going to piss you off and get you really annoyed. But seeing the work that it takes for guys and women to represent our country and compete on the biggest stage is just awesome. And I personally don't want to be able to miss those moments, right? And I think overall, that would just be a better mindset to go forward instead of constantly looking for the pain to rip from, Because ultimately, we had great Olympians going forward and doing amazing work. And it just feels as if that these moments are just almost like sucked out of the room and we just ignore all the greatness of people who frankly support the same things that I do. And we just don't give them the same type of love and the same type of notoriety that we do all the bullshit that always seems to break through the fourth wall for all of us in this kind of way. But shout out to the men's team. This will be the last time I will ever talk about y'all. But happy that you guys won. Shout out to the women who won as well. And shout out to all the Olympians. I think we got 12 gold medals, tied for number 2, which overall, I don't think Winter Olympics is really our thing for a lot of different reasons. Money, weather, mostly money. But, looked like we did a pretty good showing. Moving on, though, to another cold weather city. We're going to be talking about the Bears, the Chicago Bears. Why are we talking about the Chicago Bears, even though the NFL season is over? We were talking about them because they might be leaving Chicago. It's Chi-Town, insert word. There's a report right now that says that the Bears might be looking to leave Chicago. Right now, it appears that they are thinking about moving potentially to Indiana as a team. There's also reports that Iowa might be looking to get the Bears to come through. If you are a Commanders fan or if you're a Giants/Jets fan, you kind of know this lifestyle of rooting for a team that technically does not live or does not work in your own state anymore. And here's kind of the big picture kind of start about this, right? If you don't know, the Chicago Bears are owned by the Halas family, Halas McKinney family, right? McAllis family, rather. And these are generations down owners, right? And the reason why that is important is because they are not as rich. I use that specifically. They're not as rich as some of these other owners that have teams in the NFL, right? According to Forbes, the family's entire net worth is only about $1.7 billion. I know $1.7 billion is a lot of money, but at the same time, it costs a lot of money to run an NFL team and specifically needs to get a new stadium, right? If you guys do not know, the president of the Chicago Bears is a man named Kevin Warren. why that name might be a little bit familiar to you is because he used to be the commissioner of the Big Ten. So he understands the landscape of this part of the country, right? And his job, by and large part, if you watch Hard Knocks, they were on Hard Knocks 2 years ago. I believe that was a Caleb Williams rookie season. His job, frankly, if you were looking around, was to find them a new stadium. I mean, they detail that a lot in the show. And unfortunately, part of this is probably trying to find a stadium that makes the most sense for them. The reason why I bring up the money is the fact that it is a lot to try and build a new stadium, and it's a lot to break a lot of ground. And one of the things that Bill Simmons said years ago was there should be like either a law or a petition that says owners need to be able to finance building their new stadium. Because unfortunately, what ends up happening is that these costs get pushed on to taxpayers, and the taxpayers end up paying for this stadium. Now, my whole stance is on taxes in general is kind of very simple. I'm fine, especially if you're in a higher class, to pay more taxes. I'm actually fine with that. My issue is where exactly are these tax dollars going and what are they used for? So if you want to push something like that for the fans, right, or for the people of Chicago, the Chicagoans, to pay for it, that's fine, in my opinion, to actually have them be a part of their taxes. My issue about that comes in to say, okay, well, then that money that you're able to use is then attributed to some type of stipend for you to go to games. So if each fan has to pay $100 extra bucks, $150 extra bucks, I believe that the Bears should give everyone who used that an ability to get that back in some form from the Bears, whether it's you get a jersey, the equivalent of that. You get to go to a game, the equivalent of that amount of money. You get some type of way where I know that this is able to use as an easy transition. Because at the end of the day, this is a business. The Bears are making money from this, okay? And the idea that they are not going to do this and I think threaten to leave is absolute bullshit. Because ultimately, these teams are bigger than the owners, right? They are foundational to the cities that they play in, okay? New York City is not the same if the Knicks played in Montana. They're just not, okay? It's not the same city, all right? The St. Louis Cardinals are not the same if they played in Miami. These teams are well more than the people who own them. They're foundational pieces of what makes that city great. And these owners, or governors, whatever you want to call them, they should act way more as stewards to this than actual owners and thinking that this is my thing, I'm moving it because I need to make a profit. Because it rips away the heart of what community actually is and what it should be. And while the Houses have owned this team forever, it's kind of the way I think if you can't afford to run a stadium or build one for yourself, you should sell the team. But in selling the team, there should be something in writing of you need to keep this team here, right? It was something that came out. I don't know if anyone saw it, but Steve Buscemi, he's the guy who owns the Ravens, right? He came out and said in his end of press conference, it was around the time where they fired John Harbaugh, who's now the coach of the New York Giants. He said that he's not going to he's not going to give the team to his kids, right? He's going to sell the team to whoever, right? And he's not very old. He's in his 60s. Okay, so he's not an old owner. Like, he can do this, God willing, he's still around, but he can do this for a couple more years. And he spoke about, I think the large part was saying that he didn't want it to tear apart his family, which is true. But I also think it's important that these things should pass hands and don't need to stay with everyone for one time, because ultimately it is no longer what his family had it as. He got it. He made money from it, but it's a foundational part of what Baltimore is. And it's going to be a big deal if the fact that the Chicago Bears, who have been in Chicago for over 100 years, moved to Indiana. And it just shouldn't be the case. It's something that has to stay. It's something that I think hopefully will be something that they stay in the city of Chicago for a long time. Transitioning now from that to a very odd story, or an odd kind of situation that's happening right now. We are in March. It's going to be March in a week from now, and which means we are at the next big kind of jump of the calendar, which is going to be obviously March Madness, right? Shout out to Future. And again, I like March Madness a lot. I do not like college basketball. But college basketball has been going crazy this year as far as the amount of talent that's been in college basketball and the amount of like really, really good teams and really good matchups we've seen. This is probably one of the first years I can remember where I've seen like the number 1 team is playing the number 4 team, the number 2 team is playing the number 3 team in the regular season. Now, a lot of that has to do with like a bunch of the teams are kind of now smashed into smaller conference or bigger conferences rather. So these teams will end up playing each other more often. But honestly, the old stuff I've been hearing about college basketball is a lot of the stuff that keeps stuff in the news. And it's tough a lot of times because basketball deals with this issue way more than football, in the sense that because football is played less, I think that the conversations around it tend to be way more focused on the actual games and maybe the things that players say regarding the games. Versus basketball is almost in a weirder place where, because there are so many games, pro and in college, the things that kind of spark through or get through is a lot of the nonsense. And one of the things that will determine whether or not this is nonsense or not is the situation right now with Darren Peterson. People don't know Darren Peterson is possibly going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. He's battling between AJ Debinsa. He's battling between Cam Boozer for that kind of, number 1 spot. No one really kind of knows right now who's going to be the number 1 pick. And the issue with him is that of all the guys I just mentioned before, the guys who are kind of like in his class of being the number 1 pick, he's like not playing. There's been several games where he hasn't played due to some injuries or some ailments, hamstring, muscle cramps, and he's just been kind of up and down the whole year. When he's played, he's looked really, really good, but he just hasn't played. And there's an article right now on ESPN that kind of details out like what it's kind of been like dealing with him and having him be on the team. And he's probably getting heavy amount of criticism. I could just imagine. Kansas is one of the big things about Kansas is Kansas basketball. And everyone kind of knows he's only going to be there for a year. Then he's going to head to the NBA draft. And I think there's a micro conversation about Deron Peterson and a macro conversation I'm going to try to have. The micro is this. I don't know how this guy goes number 1 now, because he's kind of stuck in a quagmire, right? He's either hurt, right? And so you're going to spend a top 5 pick on a guy who might have serious injuries. It might end up being Zion Williamson, which is when he plays, he's awesome. But when he doesn't play a lot. And he's already a guy who's getting hurt a lot in college, and he's going to play potentially triple the amount of games going into his next season in the NBA. Okay, so that's not going to be great. And then the other side of it is, let's say he's not hurt and he's kind of like, I'm saving myself because I'm only going to be here for a year and I'm going to be in the NBA next season. Then it's like, okay, now I had a guy who basically got paid to play in Kansas and is now not playing because he wants to save himself. So now he's stuck in this like weird, like, what exactly is he going to do? Again, I don't have all the information, so I can't necessarily speculate on what exactly is happening. But I guarantee you fans are going to point to, unfortunately, NIL being one of the main kind of issues of this. And I do not know how much power Bill Self has to deal with this, right? Because you would think that he can just either send the guy home, he can basically ream him out in the media, but Peterson can also be like, all right, I'm out, and I'm just going to train, and he'll still be a top 5, top 3 pick in the NBA draft. And so we're at this like kind of crazy point of no one really knows what's really going on with him. And he's kind of now unable to really say anything about what's happening. And the larger kind of conversation about all this is going to be how much I think NIL has just ruined college sports in such a grand way. And I am not ever against paying the players. It's never been like that. But when you have a guy, multiple players who have played in a professional basketball game, I do not care if you consider the G League a good league or not, that is professional basketball, trying to now come back to college, you have a broken system. And Kurt Herbstreit has kind of been going around, kind of laying the groundwork, saying that, you know, the teams are thinking about just leaving the NCAA in total and making their own kind of thing. And it has just created such a mess because you've never had anyone step up to control college athletics in any kind of way. No one. And no one's ever seemed to be able to wrangle this thing together. It's just kind of like a bunch of dudes wearing hoodies in some Illuminati type of situation, making decisions. And the fans get really screwed from all this stuff because now it's like no one really knows what's going on. And year to year, there's just these massive changes that happens over and over and over again. And so it ends up becoming this side story when the basketball's been really good. And I'm actually really excited to not just watch March Madness this year, but I want to watch the college the tournaments, right? The division tournaments, or rather the conference championships. Because I do think that's going to help me get at least somewhat of an idea of how these teams are playing, you know? Because one of my hot takes is the fact that I think March Madness starts off great for the casuals, but ends up much better for the fans later on. Like it decrescendos, right? Like it's better in the beginning and then gets worse as the gets going. But I just think it's a terrible way to pick a champion, you know? Like it's just not a fundamentally good way for you to actually have a champion be crowned. And it ends up every year that this is kind of the way that basketball unfortunately unfolds, is that we don't talk about the actual basketball. But it'll be something to watch going forward to see how much this guy plays and just how March Madness kind of transpires, you know, for this season. All right, everyone. Thank you guys for listening to the Men Who Cry podcast. Like, subscribe, review, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. I'll be back talking to you guys again later this week. All right, everyone. Peace out.